Incident is one of the darkest marks in the IDF's operational history, at least so it feels from inside Israel. If we look at this, how exactly did this happen?
Well, I think that there are a number of factors involved, and let me start by saying none of them excuse, but perhaps explain what happened. And the first is, let's say, the most obvious: the pressure of being in a combat zone, surrounded by enemies, in constant combat, seeing friends getting killed and wounded. The adrenaline level is extremely high, and that in and of itself creates the background, let's say, for this kind of a situation. But I want to take it a step further, and something that I haven't seen discussed in any of the reports that I've seen. We're talking about soldiers who have been in more or less constant combat for some 70 days now. And I think that the combination of fatigue as well as sleep deprivation, and it's something we also don't talk about very much, but these soldiers are not getting enough sleep, and over time that becomes cumulative. One of the direct effects of that is poor decision making. And that's known from tests. I was actually involved many years ago in a study in the US military. And one of the early conclusions was that individual and command decision making becomes quicker and poorer as you go deeper and deeper into issues with loss of sleep. So I think that's an additional explanation to a soldier who certainly did not mean to shoot hostages or soldiers. Apparently there were two different ones. And even, I think we can say with certainty, even if they hadn't been hostages under the circumstances, they shouldn't have been fired upon.
The problem is it feels more and more that this is not exactly an isolated incident. We saw in Jerusalem the armed civilian that neutralized a terrorist shot dead by an IDF reservist. In fact, something like 11% of battlefield losses from the IDF in this war have been friendly fire incidents.
Right. Okay, so here we should make a distinction. Friendly fire, and I hate that term. In Hebrew, we say, fire one upon the other, or from, two different sides. But friendly fire incidents in urban combat are part of the reality of a very difficult situation of knowing who's where at any given moment. And let me give you an example of what I mean by that. In open ground warfare, when units are moving independently, you know that your right flank is adjacent to his left flank. And everybody, let's say, to the right of me is friendly and continuing. In urban warfare, if units are moving in parallel along parallel streets, the space in between them is a dead zone. And crossing over the line between them, because it's blocked by an urban area, by buildings, is much more complicated, much more difficult, and confrontations are also at much closer range. So somebody pops out of a doorway, the error of fire under those circumstances, or seeing somebody move in an area, let's say using a drone or observation, an area that is very hard to determine exactly where it is. Streets are filled with rubble, buildings are knocked down, so old maps may or may not be, or even aerial photographs may or may not be particularly accurate. They're all tragic, but I would say that the numbers here are within what would be expected in this kind of urban combat, although I believe they could be reduced.
Now, one of the things we saw is the military saying that some new terms, new rules of engagement were issued after this incident that are supposed to prevent that. What exactly does that mean? What do we know about these new rules?
Look, the new rules basically are adding something that the Army didn't take into account, and that is that people walking around may actually be hostages. Now, again, this has to be kept in the context of Hamas using all sorts of means to draw out Israeli soldiers, but certainly, and that includes sending people out and making them look like hostages. They had dolls and loudspeakers the other day with children speaking Hebrew. It's a very dirty business. But additional rules would mean, pause, take into account that these people actually might be hostages before you automatically engage them as enemy. It's another factor. It's an additional step, and I think a very important one.
Major, we're talking about this because hindsight is always 20/20, but there's the flip side of this very argument, which is we put all of this onus on the soldiers in the field to make the correct decision. What happens if they're double thinking, that they're thinking about what their actions might do, and they're second guessing themselves when somebody pops out of that building in that dead zone and it's not a friendly? Is it going to cost us?
It might. I would hope not. And here again, I think that if the situation, the tragic situation that just happened, had been that they simply popped up and as a reflex reaction they were shot, I'd say, you know what, that would really be one of those unfortunate, there's nothing you can do about it, battlefield realities. So I would hope that the instruction, the rule, and what's followed is that a soldier who's surprised will respond automatically to that surprise as if it's hostile. But in any chance to make a decision, any chance to analyze the situation, certainly under cover and protecting themselves, to give that additional one step in between and say, okay, perhaps these are hostages, perhaps these are innocents. Let's see if we can freeze this situation. And of course, reversing that instantaneously if it turns out not to be the case. But let's freeze the situation as best we can and try to determine who these people really are.
Well, thank you very much, Elliot, for helping us understand